The silence in our suburban home in Naperville wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears after a bomb goes off, a high-pitched frequency that tells you everything you thought was solid has just turned into vapor. I sat at the mahogany dining table, the one we'd spent 3 weekends picking out in Chicago because she wanted the perfect grain, and I stared at a single manila envelope. My wife of 8 years, Elena, stood by the window. She was framed by the golden hour light, watching the sunset over the Illinois horizon, as if she were already looking at a world I wasn't part of. She looked hauntingly beautiful, which made the words coming out of her mouth feel even more like a physical assault. "I need to find myself, Jax," she had said, her voice airy, as if she were discussing a change in the weather and not the end of a decade-long partnership. "I feel like I've been living in a box. I need to know what's outside of it. I need to feel alive again." I knew what living outside the box meant. It was code for Julian. Julian was a spiritual consultant she'd met at a high-end corporate retreat in Scottsdale 3 months ago. He wore linen shirts and talked about unfettering the soul, while I wore tailored suits and talked about structural integrity and building codes. To Elena, I was the cage, and Julian was the key. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I looked down at the divorce papers. She wanted freedom, but her version of freedom came with a hefty price tag that she expected me to pay. She was the woman I'd promised to grow old with, the one I'd held through her father's funeral and her own career failures. Now she was looking at me like I was a piece of furniture she was tired of seeing in the hallway. I realized then that I wasn't being divorced. I was being evicted from her life because I was no longer exciting enough to occupy her space. The transition from loving spouse to litigious adversary happened so fast it gave me whiplash. Within 48 hours of that conversation, Elena had moved from the bedroom to the guest suite, and her tone had shifted from airy philosophy to cold calculation. She wasn't just leaving, she was auditing our life. I watched her walk through the house with a notebook and a marking item she felt she was owed for the time she sacrificed for my career. It didn't matter that her career as a freelance interior designer had been largely subsidized by my salary as a senior architect. It didn't matter that I had worked 60-hour weeks at the firm so she could have the luxury of finding her passion. In her mind, she was the victim of my stability. I remember one specific Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen trying to make a simple sandwich, and she walked in with her iPad. "We need to discuss the equity in the Naperville house," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Since the market has trended up 12% in this zip code, I think it's only fair I get 60% of the sale price. After all, I did all the decorating. That's sweat equity, Jax." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized I didn't know this person. The woman who used to make me coffee and laugh at my terrible jokes had been replaced by a stranger who saw our marriage as a business merger that had gone sour. She was already calculating how much of my future she could take with her into her new freedom. The weeks leading up to the final move-out were a slow-motion car crash. We lived in the same house, but we were ghosts. I would wake up at 4 a.m., unable to breathe, the weight of the upcoming loneliness pressing down on my chest. I'd walk through the house, touching the walls, remembering where we were when we decided to paint the living room eggshell white instead of cream. Elena, meanwhile, was constantly on the phone. I'd hear her muffled laughter coming from the guest room, laughter that I hadn't heard in years. She was talking to Julian, or maybe her new, enlightened friends in Chicago. She was already building a life that didn't include me, while I was still trying to figure out how to tell my parents that the daughter-in-law they adored was walking away for a vibe. I tried to save it once. One night I knocked on the guest room door. "Elena, can we just talk? Not about lawyers, not about the house, just us. Are you sure this is what you want? We could go to counseling. We could take a sabbatical." She opened the door just a crack. Her eyes were tired but determined. "Jax, you're a good man. You're a safe man. But I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to burn. And you're just a steady flame. It's not enough." She closed the door. That was the moment I realized that being a good man was my greatest liability in her eyes. I went back to my room and cried, not for her, but for the version of me that thought being loyal was enough to keep someone. The day the moving van arrived was a gray, drizzly morning in suburban Illinois. It felt appropriate. The neighbors, the Millers, the Grahams, the people we'd hosted for dozens of summer barbecues, stood on their lawns, pretending to check their mail while they watched the perfect couple dismantle their life. Elena was organized. She had labeled boxes: kitchen, high-end, bedroom, personal, studio. She didn't take the cheap stuff. She took the espresso machine I'd saved up for, the Italian leather chair, and the original artwork we'd bought on our honeymoon in Charleston. She was stripping the house of its soul, leaving me with the bones. As the movers loaded the last of her things, she stood on the porch, Natch wearing a designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses. She looked like a celebrity leaving a press conference. "I'll have my lawyer send over the final signatures for the house sale by Friday," she said. "No, I'm sorry. No, thank you for the 8 years. Just a logistical update." I stood there, my hands in my pockets, feeling the cool breeze. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Elena. I truly do." She gave a small, almost pitying smile. "I already have, Jax. I've found me." She stepped into her SUV and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear around the curve of the cul-de-sac. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked back into the house, and for the first time in my life, I felt the true meaning of the word empty. The first month of freedom was a nightmare. I'd come home from the firm to a house that smelled like nothing. No candles, no perfume, no cooking, just the sterile scent of floor wax and regret. I stopped eating. I started drinking. Not enough to lose my job, but enough to numb the edges of the reality that I was 34 and starting over in a house that felt like a tomb. I spent my nights on Reddit, specifically the infidelity and divorce subreddits. I'd read stories of men who had been through worse, men whose wives had cleared out the bank accounts or disappeared with the kids. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Have you ever had someone tell you that your stability was a flaw, only to watch them crash later? Reading those stories was my only lifeline. I realized there was a pattern to what Elena was doing. It was a midlife crisis disguised as a spiritual awakening. She wasn't finding herself. She was running away from the responsibilities of a real relationship into the fantasy of a temporary one. I saw people calling it the fog. It gave me a small amount of comfort to know that her behavior wasn't unique. It was a cliché. But knowing it was a cliché didn't make the bed feel any less cold. By the third month, the whiskey wasn't working anymore. I woke up one morning with a pounding headache and looked at the pile of takeout boxes in the kitchen. I looked at the sweat equity Elena had left behind, the half-empty rooms and the dusty corners. I'm an architect. I build things. And I realized that for the last 8 years, I'd been building a life around someone else's foundation. Now that she'd pulled the foundation out, the structure had collapsed. If I wanted to survive, I had to stop mourning the ruin and start clearing the site. I called a realtor. "Sell the house, sell everything in it. I don't care about the price, just get it gone." I threw myself into my work with a ferocity that scared my partners. There was a massive commercial project opening up in Seattle, a multi-billion-dollar tech campus that required a lead architect willing to relocate and live on site for a year. It was a career-making opportunity that I'd previously turned down because Elena didn't want to leave her Chicago social circle. I called the senior partner. "Is the Seattle lead still open?" "Yes, Jax, but it's a grind. It'll consume your life." "Good," I said. "I don't have a life right now. I need to build a new one." Seattle was the reset I needed. The gray skies and constant rain matched my internal mood, but the work was exhilarating. I was designing spaces for the future. Clean lines, glass, steel, and light. I was no longer the safe guy in Naperville. I was the high-level executive running a team of 50 people. I started hitting the gym at 5 a.m. It wasn't about vanity, it was about reclaiming my body. I wanted to burn off the resentment, the feeling of being stagnant that Elena had projected onto me. I lost 15 pounds of marriage weight and gained a layer of steel. I traded my suburban dad wardrobe for custom-tailored suits that fit my new leaner frame. I also stopped checking Elena's social media. I'd blocked her, but I'd still find myself hovering over the unblock button at 2 a.m. One night, I finally deleted the apps entirely. I didn't need to see her and Julian at Burning Man. I didn't need to see her new truth. If she wanted to be free, I was going to give her the ultimate freedom, the freedom of my complete absence. While I was building a skyscraper in Seattle, Elena was building a disaster in Chicago. Julian, the man of vibrational alignment, turned out to be a man of high-interest loans and empty promises. He convinced Elena that they needed to start a creative lifestyle hub in a trendy West Loop loft. Elena, fueled by the $400,000 she'd squeezed out of our home sale and my retirement accounts, signed the lease. She bought the artisanal furniture. She paid for the website. But Julian didn't contribute. Julian didn't have capital, he had energy. And energy doesn't pay for a $6,000 a month loft. Within 6 months, Julian's consulting sessions, which usually involved him drinking expensive wine with younger women while Elena worked on the branding, began to dwindle. The fire Elena wanted wasn't just hot, it was consuming her entire financial future. She was learning that finding yourself is an expensive hobby when you're funding a parasite. A year and a half after the divorce, I was at an art gala for the Seattle Children's Hospital. I was there as a donor, standing near a sculpture of blown glass, feeling remarkably comfortable in my own skin. That's when I met Maya. She was standing by the same sculpture, looking at it with a clinical intensity. "The structural tension on that centerpiece is incredible," she said, without looking at me. "Most people just see the color, and they don't see the pressure it's under to stay that way." I turned to her. She was beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty than Elena's. Elena was like a polished mirror. She reflected what you wanted to see. Maya was like the glass in front of us, clear, strong, and forged in heat. "It's held together by a single point of failure," I replied. "If that base cracks, the whole thing shatters." She finally looked at me and smiled. "Then we'd better make sure the base is solid." Maya was a pediatric surgeon. She spent her days saving lives and her nights studying for the next breakthrough. She was brilliant, grounded, and had a sense of humor that was as sharp as a scalpel. We didn't find ourselves together. We shared ourselves. It was the first time I realized that a relationship didn't have to be a constant struggle for vibrational alignment. It could just be two people moving in the same direction. The email started about 2 years in. By this time, I was a partner at my firm. I had a modern condo in Belltown with a view of the Space Needle. I had Maya. I had a life that felt like it was carved out of granite. The first email from Elena was titled, "Tax Documents." It was a ruse. There were no missing documents. When I opened it, it was a paragraph about taxes, followed by 3 pages of reflections. She talked about how Julian had betrayed her journey. She mentioned that the West Loop loft had been a learning experience. Translation, she'd lost it. Watching Elena try to rewrite history after she realized the grass wasn't greener is a tough pill to swallow. If you were in my shoes seeing an ex crawl back only after your life improved, would you even hit reply? Let me know in the comments. I didn't reply. I sent the tax portion to my accountant and archived the rest. I realized that Elena's regret wasn't moral. It was situational. She didn't regret hurting me. She regretted losing the safety net I provided while she performed her high-wire act with a con artist. Work became my sanctuary. The Seattle Tech campus was nearing completion. It was a masterpiece of sustainable design. I remember standing on the top floor one evening, looking out over the Puget Sound. I felt a sense of power I'd never felt in Naperville. Now, when you're in a marriage where you're constantly told you're stagnant, you start to believe it. But looking at this multi-billion-dollar project, I knew I was a force of nature. I had managed thousands of people, navigated complex legalities, and built something that would stand for a century. I was at the top of my game, and I realized that Elena's departure had been the catalyst. If she hadn't left, I would still be in Illinois, designing mid-sized office buildings and trying to make her happy with expensive kitchen renovations. She thought she was the one escaping a cage. She didn't realize she was the one who had been holding me back. I had to return to Chicago for a brief business meeting. My firm was consulting on a new skyscraper in the Loop. I was sitting in a high-end coffee shop on Wacker Drive, Anna checking my blueprints on my tablet when the bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. I could feel her presence. Elena walked in, and she didn't look like the woman in the designer trench coat anymore. She looked weathered. Her skin lacked that Scottsdale glow, and her clothes, while still nice, were from a few seasons ago. She sat down at my table without being invited. "Jax," she whispered, "I saw on LinkedIn that you were in town. I had to see you." I didn't close my tablet. I looked at her with the same professional detachment I'd use for a difficult contractor. "Elena, I'm in the middle of a meeting preparation. Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Just 10 minutes. I owe you an apology. I was so lost. Julian, he was a mistake. A terrible, expensive mistake. I kept thinking about Naperville. About how safe I felt with you." "Safe," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "You told me safe wasn't enough. You wanted to burn." "I did," she sobbed, not caring who saw. "And I got burned. I have nothing left, Jax. I moved back in with my parents. Everything I took from the house, it's gone. Julian took it all. He's in Florida now with someone else." I sat there, and for the first time I felt the full weight of the situation. She wasn't here because she loved me. She was here because the fire had left her in the cold, and she wanted back into the house she'd helped burn down. "Elena," I said, leaning forward, "you didn't just leave me for Julian. You left me for the idea that I wasn't enough. You spent 8 years letting me build a life for us, only to tell me at the finish line that you didn't like the color of the walls. You didn't just break my heart. You tried to break my identity." "I know," she whispered. "I've been in therapy. I'm doing the work. I realize now that I projected my own insecurities onto you. Can't we just start over? Slowly? I'll move to Seattle. I'll do anything." I looked at my watch. It was time to go. "Elena, you can't start over with a person who no longer exists. The Jax you knew, the guy who would have forgiven this, you killed him. You were very efficient about it." She reached out to grab my hand, her fingers searching for the familiarity of my touch. But as she did, her eyes froze. She saw the platinum band on my left hand. The color drained from her face. You're married?" "3 months ago," I said. "Her name is Maya. She's a surgeon. She's brilliant, she's loyal, and she knows exactly who she is. She doesn't need to find herself at my expense." "How?" she gasped. "It hasn't even been 2 years. You replaced me that fast?" "I didn't replace you," I said, standing up and packing my tablet. "I upgraded. I found someone who values the steady flame you despised. You chose freedom, Elena. And this is what freedom looks like. You are free to live with the consequences of your choices. And I am free of the burden of your happiness." I walked out of that coffee shop and didn't look back. The wind coming off the Chicago River was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt light. I heard from a mutual friend later that Elena had a full-scale breakdown in that coffee shop. She had been convinced that her confession would be enough to bring me back. She had spent months crafting this narrative where she was the prodigal wife returning to her safe husband. But the world doesn't work that way. She is still in Naperville, living in her parents' basement, working as a receptionist at a local boutique. She spends her nights scrolling through the social media she once used to flaunt Julian. Only now she's looking at photos of my life in Seattle. She sees the awards, the travel, and the photos of Maya and me at the cabin we built. Every post is a reminder of the empire she walked away from because she was bored. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. Was it her audacity to ask for closure or the moment I showed her the ring? Today, Imaya and I are expecting our first child. My firm has opened a branch in London, and I'm the regional director. Life is busy, it's loud, and it's incredibly fulfilling. When I look at Maya, I don't see a mirror. I see a partner. We don't talk about vibrations. We talk about our goals, our fears, and the world we want to build for our son. I realize now that Elena was right about one thing. I was stagnant, but I wasn't stagnant because of who I was. I was stagnant because I was pouring all my energy into a leaky vessel. The revenge wasn't about making Elena poor or lonely. It was about becoming the man I was always meant to be. a man she was never capable of appreciating. The concept of revenge is often misunderstood. People think it's about making the other person suffer. They think it's about seeing them fail. But true revenge, the kind that actually heals you, is reaching a point where their failure or success has absolutely zero impact on your soul. Elena Vance is a name in a file cabinet. She is a memory of a lesson learned the hard way. My family's secrets aren't scandalous. They are simple. We value honesty. We value presence. We value the quiet Tuesday nights just as much as the grand vacations. My channel, Family Secrets and Revenge, is built on these truths. We share these stories not to gossip, but to remind you that when someone walks out on you, they aren't taking your future with them. They are just clearing the path for someone better to walk in. Thank you for staying with me through this 6,000-word journey. This story, my story, is a testament to the fact that freedom is often a trap, and instability is often the greatest freedom of all. If you've been where I was, sitting at a table, staring at an empty house, wondering how you'll ever breathe again, I want you to know that the architectural plans for your life can be redrawn. You are the architect. You hold the pen. Before you go, please take a moment to subscribe to Family Secrets and Revenge. Your likes and comments help us reach more people who might be sitting in their own version of that quiet Naperville house tonight. Share this video with someone who needs to know that the grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. I'm Jax, and this has been a story of betrayal, rebuilding, and the ultimate victory of a life well lived. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay loyal, and never let someone else's search for themselves make you lose who you are. Family Secrets and Revenge, signing off.